Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I want to point up front too that Oregon as a state is definitely in its infancy in terms of implementing pathways to adult success or early warning systems. Again, I will change a few names and I'll tell you why we call it something slightly different in Oregon here in a bit. But like I said, at the statewide level, we're at our infancy. We just received some funding to ensure that these systems are available in every single school district in our state. And that's kind of the place in history where we're at with this in Oregon. So I'm also excited to be here to learn from all of you. There are people in this room that in my pathway of working on early warning systems since about 2010, I've been quoting to try to get others to hear what this could mean for our students and for our educators. So I feel a little bit humbled and maybe I shouldn't really be the one speaking to you all because, again, there are people here that I have brought forward their work and quoted their pieces to others to try to convince them. Sarah talked about this a little bit, but I do want to just share that I have some personal experience with these at a district level. So I was a superintendent at Bethel School District in Eugene, Oregon, for about 6,000 students in our system there. And we developed an early warning system at that district that was elementary through high school several years back. And mostly through that process, I just learned a lot about what I didn't know as we were practicing with both our educators and our students, trying to make this thing work in a school district with a homemade system. And I also imagine that the other states that have availability of early warning systems for all of their schools and all of their districts, each of them have their own pathway. Each state is pretty unique. So what I'm going to share today is Oregon's pathway to this system. And to do that, I want to share just a little bit about Oregon so you have some context, and then I'll get into how we got to where we're at today and what we think some of our future challenges and where we are placing some of our hopes in this system. So it'll be a somewhat unique path, I think. So just to give you a little bit of information about Oregon, share a little who we are. I think that we're a state that can really be characterized by rapid diversification of our student body. So when you think about the people in our system who are making decisions about schools, they're making them in a context of when they were in school. I'm talking about legislators, school board members, maybe some school administrators. These folks are in the United States, everybody's an education expert because everybody went to school, right? And so these are the folks that we work with to design systems and try to move change. And when these legislators went to school in Oregon, or these school board members went to school in Oregon, think about 4 decades ago, so they're all mostly in their 50s and 60s, they mostly look like me, they're mostly white males. When they went to Oregon schools, the population then was about 4% students of color. Today, we have 40% students of color. So this is a pretty rapid change for the state of Oregon and its population. And we have people making decisions about what happens in our schools based on a very different experience than what our kids today experience. So just a little bit more on the demographics here. About half of our students are economically disadvantaged, experiencing poverty in some way. About 20% of our students are emerging bilingual students, so they come to our schools speaking some other language than English, and about 160 different languages in our state right now. About 4% of our students identify as homeless sometime during the school year last year. About 9% identify as LGBT in high school. 12% of our students are mobile, meaning that they move between schools or districts at least once during the school year. And about 14% of our students are students with disabilities. So this rapid change has created this need for the Department of Education to take a different stance. And For a few years now, we've been operating with an equity lens, so a decision-making tool that helps us think more clearly and engage with different communities in bolder ways, more thoughtful ways, as we make decisions that impact statewide policy. And we also, through that process, developed an equity stance at the Department of Education that we use in our decision-making across the state. And it basically says when we're implementing something at a statewide level, whether it's policy or legislation or just some kind of procedure within our office, that we want to ensure that what we do translates into resource allocation that's equitable, education rigor that is held high for all of our students, and creates opportunities for our historically and currently marginalized and underserved populations. And further, to us, what that means is that sometimes we have to not just improve what we have, but we have to actually take apart things that are currently existing because they are creating some of these inequities. So we're pretty bold about talking about dismantling systems that are in place to replace them with systems that actually work for the students we're serving today. And as part of that, we're working hard to develop stronger relationships across the state of Oregon with a variety of stakeholders that haven't always been engaged in the education system. So we've developed this really quick little video that I want to share with you. Oh, actually, I want to back up before I share the video. On this equity lens, one of the things that causes us to do is be really thoughtful about our language. And so in Oregon, in some of our laws, you'll see early warning systems, but out of the Department of Education, you'll hear us talk about it in different ways. So we're starting to adopt this pathways language that you all are using here. We also talk about what we call early indicator and intervention systems. So we're really marrying our multiple tiered systems of support with our data systems and really thinking about those as one model, but also thinking about that these data systems alone, which are a big piece of an early warning system, and they're kind of the shiny piece of it because we haven't had those in education for so long. We've been unable to manage our data in effective ways and get that in the hands of educators in really actionable ways. They become the center of everything. But at their heart, just if you look at that alone without the rest of the system around it, it's pointing out deficits of individual students. And so it can very quickly lead to deficit-based discussions by educators about students. And so we are trying to be really thoughtful about that language so that we're always talking about changing our systems to support the assets and needs of each of our students. So you'll hear me talk more about early indicator and intervention systems than early warning systems, but think of them as synonymous. So a little bit about who we are and how we're trying to go about our work. What I haven't shared yet is some of the expectations that Oregonians have for their schools and for their students and the education system and those outcomes. So I'm just going to go straight to the top there, the graduation rates. So in Oregon, we have super high expectations. So our legislature is far more ambitious with what they want students to achieve than they are with paying for that through investment. So we have some of the most rigorous graduation requirements in the country. So it is statewide. Some of our states don't have state-level graduation requirements, actually, but we're one of them that does, and it requires 24 credits to graduate. Also requires that students demonstrate proficiency through assessment or work sample on reading, writing, and mathematics, and then there are some other requirements even beyond those. So pretty rigorous diploma requirements and a very low graduation rate. So we have, just last year, our graduation rate was about 80% of our students graduated within 4 years. That's after year improvements every single year for the last 9 years that we've been doing the 4-year cohort model. And that's still where we're at, which is, I think in 2017, placed the second worst in the country graduation rates. So clearly, there were things that needed to be done. So this pathway that I'm going to talk about is a pathway both to determine what can be done with the current system and also if you were to invest in the system, how can you better support students on this pathway to adult success, starting with a diploma. So I'm going to start this back with, in about somewhere between 2010, 2015, in that range, we had a number of individual districts that came together at times through a sort of a loose affiliation through what was called the Oregon Leadership Network, and we're working on early warning systems. So we had something like 5 districts at different stages of implementation, some working just at the high school level, some working elementary through high school to develop these systems, and very much focused on getting the data in the hands of educators and still learning a lot about how to set those indicators, how to create interventions to support students, how to monitor, how to communicate about it with families and with community leaders. Then, and I was in one of those districts, like I said earlier. So in May of 2016, our governor, Governor Brown, called and asked me to come to the state and take on this new position because Oregon needed to do something about its graduation rates, and this new position was this Education Innovation Officer position. And I said, that sounds really great, but I'm having a super time in my 10th year as superintendent at Bethel School District, and I look forward to working with this person. I hope you get somebody great. I did that for 2 more calls, and then she called my board chair and said, we're going to take Colt to the state and have him work for all of us, and he can still support you from there. And so I ended up going to the state of Oregon and into this position, which was really an amazing opportunity, and one I honestly was not sure I was ready for, and still questioning that at times. The first thing that I did was try to recognize that Oregon is super diverse. So we have 197 school districts, like I showed you on one of those earlier slides. We have we're a small state, we only have 580,000 students. That's kind of a match to Chicago public schools. Where I learned some of my EWS early years information. So when you think about the physical size of Oregon, it's a pretty large state. And the districts are diverse, not only in their student body, but in where they're at in the state and their size. So we have about 13 of our 197 school districts that have more than 10,000 students, with our 3 largest hitting around that 40,000 student mark. And we have 13 school districts with fewer than 10 students. So that's the span that we're working with. So we really need to think about very rural parts of the state of Oregon, what they could accomplish, and while we're also thinking about our metro school districts in the Portland area and what they could accomplish, and find something that works for everyone. So I set off and I toured the state of Oregon. I talked to over 1,000 individuals, and these were students, educators, community members, families, about what we needed to do to turn around graduation outcomes in Oregon and what that would look like. And I'll show you that in just a minute, but it culminated in this report that was called, What Will It Take to Improve Oregon's Graduation Outcomes? Thankfully, one of the things that it identified was an early warning system, or an early indicator and intervention system. I was worried all the way through those conversations that this might not actually show up and what I would do about that. So that report ended up informing a Senate bill, so in Oregon Senate Bill 183, that included funding and support for a statewide early warning system available to all school districts. And by the end of the legislative session in 2017, it did not pass. Oregon also has a history with failing really big at implementing big technology systems. And so our legislature is very hesitant to put any resource into the hands of state departments, whether they're education or health or human services, any money for a statewide technology system, because of the poor history that Oregon has had for about 15 years implementing these kinds of programs. So I learned that the hard way, but I kept advocacy up around this system, especially as the legislature was beginning to think deeply about real investments in education. It's been an underfunded system for a long time in the state of Oregon. We're one of the systems across, when you compared us nationally, we were definitely at the bottom quartile of funding for our schools. And so they were thinking about, this is the year to really think about an investment. And that was a challenging road for our legislature. They created a joint committee on student success that included Democrats and Republicans and both the Senate and the House side. And they looked at my report and they thought, that's great, but we're going to do our own tour. So they also toured the state of Oregon. And they did a really nice job. So they started every morning when they went to a site. They went to about 40 different sites in Oregon. And they started in the morning about 7 a.m. talking to business leaders about workforce, how we needed to prepare students to be future citizens in our state. And then at 9 o'clock, they would show up at a school and they would sit for 2 hours, each legislator, with about 4 students at a table, listening to them and hearing their needs deeply. And they would switch out and talk to about 4 different groups like that for 2 hours. And they would tour a few school sites and see things that were atrocious and things that were working well. And after school, talk to legislators. And then in the evenings from 7 to 9 p.m., they would have community input and hear from everyone in the community. And that was pretty powerful. It opened their eyes and both gave them some direction about common needs across the state of Oregon, but also this need for flexibility, understanding that we have this vast diversity in our school districts and their capacity and their size. So after talking with them a lot, and then they went off on their tour, they came back in May of 2019 and passed what we call the Student Success Act in Oregon. And I'll share a little bit of what that is, but a big piece of it is from the report I created, there were 10 suggestions. Many of them ended up in the Student Success Act, thankfully, and one of them was this one, which says implement early indicator and intervention systems. So that is super exciting to think about an investment coming to education and then a tool to help local school districts and schools steer those investments towards interventions and prevention activities that our students really need. So I want to give you a little bit of context for where this falls within the Student Success Act because that creates a challenge for us as well as a state. It's a $2 billion act, so every year $1 billion more will flow into our school system, early learning through K-12. It introduced 12 brand new programs to the state of Oregon and is enhancing 16 programs. It centers around equity, so it calls out specific groups that it wants the state and the schools to address disparities for. So it calls out students of color, students with disabilities, emerging bilingual students, and students navigating poverty, foster care, or houselessness. The other area that it has a purpose and focus around is mental and behavioral health supports. So the idea is, and they heard a lot about this around their visits around the state of Oregon, is that our students need to be in school and we need to have systems to support their learning, but we also need to be sure they're ready to learn. So it is everything from mental and behavioral health supports to feeding more of our students. So in Oregon, we'll be feeding with public funds more students per capita than any other state in the country. So the mark that they'll need to reach is 300% of poverty or lower, and they will be eligible for free meals in our schools. It also comes with a high level of accountability, higher than any of our current systems in Oregon with our state school fund. Districts need to have a lot of local accountability with their school board, but also with the state and the State Board of Education. Really need to be able to show that they're spending the money where they said they would and that it's making a difference in student outcomes. This is where the early warning system comes into play. It divides this $1 billion a year into 3 different accounts. So one's for early learning. One is the student investment account. This is where the districts have a lot of flexibility in how they can use the dollars and gear it towards student needs, especially to overcome those disparities in outcomes that we talked about. And all of those funds, there's no administrative oversight of those funds. All of those go directly to school districts. They did call out some for the student meals and for some of our CTE work and some of our other equity work in what's called the statewide initiatives account. And this is also where they put in a few $1,000,000 to allow every district to implement an early indicator and intervention system. So that's the part that I'll focus on. And it really, the language that ended up in this bill, became one of the sections of this bill, came out of Senate Bill 183. And so it does three things really. It grants funds to all school districts to implement their own early indicator and intervention system. So enough funds for them to go and purchase one, either publicly created one. We have a group of consortia of education service districts that have created these that districts can buy into, and some of them have created their own, and then some are purchasing programs, that are commercial programs for this. This is really important for Oregon, again, because of the varying size of districts and capacity of staff to be able to implement this tool. Also because the legislature doesn't want to pay for the state to create a system and possibly fail. And also because Oregon is very much a local control state. So this allows each district to have a lot of say in the system that they choose to invest in. But their system, by law, has to be designed to enable districts, students, families, educators, school counselors, and community organizations, so very inclusive group, to take necessary corrective actions to assist students graduating from high school. They have to have the big three, the ABCs, so they have to focus on attendance data, behavior data, and then course performance, or what in ours, it's called academic performance data. And then the State Board of Education can identify other data sources that must be included in all systems. So that's part of my work, is to work with the State Board to determine if we want any other data in our systems to be required for every district. Then it gives a long list of things for the Department of Education to deliver, but it didn't actually fund this part of the bill. So, but I know in order for this to be successful, we have to come through with the majority of these and a couple of others that are left off this list. They want us to provide technical assistance to ensure that the districts understand the goals and objectives of this tool, that we support districts in developing a culture and practices that encourages all students to graduate from high school. Identify meaningful predictive indicators, so at a statewide level, provide guidance to school district on how they set those indicators to determine when a student's on track or off track towards graduation. Develop local communication systems, again, for all those groups that I talked about, students, educators, families, but also community organizations, about how they can partner to use this tool. Identify and develop interventions at the school level, and then track those and monitor and be able to change interventions. And then they want locally and statewide to do a policy review. So look at expanding policies that actually promote and encourage high school graduation. And then we have some policies in our state that school districts oftentimes point to as a distraction or something that would be a disincentive for students to graduate from high school. And they want us to clean those up as well. So that's basically what this bill does. I'm going to go over the challenges and then just quickly some of our hopes for this. And then I'll step back into the panel and we can talk about this more deeply and other things related to statewide policy and implementing these kinds of tools. So our challenges include that in a $2 billion per idea investment, it's a very small portion of it to implement the early warning system at a statewide level. So it would be easy in a system for this to get lost, right? For us just to very quickly put out, here's a grant, you all can buy these if you want, and then ignore all of those pieces that are really required to make this thing actionable and work in school districts. And so I'm very concerned about that, and am continuing to work with the legislature on putting a bigger set of parameters and some slightly more funding at the state level, not at the local level, but at the state level to support these programs. And my argument to them is that this is just a smart investment. You're putting $1 billion a year into our schools, you're telling people that they need to overcome the disparities in our system, so that the 20% of our students who don't graduate on time. And the pathway for districts to know that they're actually doing that with their funds is to use an early warning system and really understand what students need the support, what that support needs to look like, and then monitor it. If they don't put that in place at the local level, we'll have districts spending money on all kinds of interventions that may or may not have a real impact on student outcomes. So this is a big challenge to our implementation. Another one is fidelity. So in a local control state where everybody's going to buy their own system on the data side and then implement in their own way, how do we ensure that every district is actually implementing in a way that has all the parts of the system that we know need to be in place to actually impact students? And so we're working with in a rulemaking process right now. In fact, today there's a big rulemaking hearing that includes parts of this portion of the bill where we're working with community partners and school districts to say, really what we're thinking about in rulemaking is, districts, you can't access this until you can show us that you're ready to implement all these parts of it. So we'll hold back the money until you can have the whole system in your district ready. Also, accomplishing an equity approach versus a deficit framework. So this again goes back to that the data points out deficits in student behaviors or outcomes for individual students. When we have that team come together and meet about individual students and determine what kinds of interventions are needed, we really need them to bring an equity framework to that discussion so they're recognizing student assets. In Oregon, we get really excited when we have a high school student go through 4 years of taking a world language, a foreign language in high school, and they end that high school career with an AP or an IB course. They get some college credits. They're headed off to college. They're like on their pathway to being bilingual, and we think that bilingualism is a great tool that creates a powerful bilingual brain. Yet when our students come to schools speaking a language other than English, we think of that as a deficit in Oregon. And we don't think of that as another pathway to bilingualism. And we need to, because when our students, our data shows through systems like this, that when our students enter high school proficient in English, after having come to us speaking a different language, they graduate at 4 percentage points higher than the statewide average, and 3 percentage points higher than our native Oregonian kids who only speak one language. So we really need to turn it around and think about the assets that our kids are bringing to school and not just think of this as a deficit model. And that's going to take some work on our part. And then, like I talked about, overcoming the sort of lack of resources for real high-quality technical assistance and communication, and ensuring that our districts are really set up for success. Hopes going forward, though, if we get this done right, every Oregon district will have access to this tool that will support students on their pathway to adult success, to a diploma, and then to next steps after that. We also have in Oregon sort of a sister tool to this that we call a statewide student longitudinal database, where we are capturing information from the workforce, from higher education, from early learning, and trying to understand at a sort of meta level how our students are doing depending on what programs they participate in along their pathway. And this, in conjunction with this local work, will help us understand after implementation how that's impacting student success in terms of living wage jobs or going on to university or other college programs. We'll see districts implement with an equity lens, which will also impact a number of other ways that they go about their work and their interventions in their school districts beyond just looking at the data. So that will have a much deeper impact than just the data review side of it. We'll have community partners engaged in our efforts, so our systems are designed to have pathways for sharing with community-based organizations that partner tightly with schools and support some of our communities through culturally specific programming to better support students along that pathway, and know that the school district can't be the center of everything, that sometimes you need other partners at the table to help support students on their pathway. And finally, we'll see graduation rates improve and more options open up for our students as they exit our K-12 system. So thank you for hearing about our pathway. I'm happy to take questions as part of this panel as time allows. Also, this is my information here, both on Twitter and my email address if you have other questions. I think that this is being captured and put into a PDF format so you all have access to it as well. Thank you very much.